Hi, this is Jeff Heaton. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install Miniforge and Miniconda, Anaconda on the same system, on a Mac M1 system. Now, why would you want both of these installed? Well, Miniforge is particularly good because it supports the Apple system on a chip, Apple Metal, so you can use the GPU with TensorFlow on these new Macintoshes. You haven't been able to use a GPU on the Mac for a while, at least not without a lot of effort. Now you can make use of that. Now, typically, I've always used Anaconda or Miniconda, and they're really sort of the same thing. Miniconda just has everything stripped down, so you have just the core, and then you add on as you need. Anaconda is just everything in the kitchen sink so that you're not installing as much. It's just different philosophies of how you want to go at things. I'm going to install Miniconda and Miniforge both on this system. Miniconda, I won't be able to use the GPU on the Mac because it's just not supported, but it has more packages than have been ported to Miniforge. And sometimes I just need Anaconda to be there. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that every package inside of Miniconda, Anaconda is going to work out of the box on the M1, because the M1 is just a complete reinvention of everything. There's no Intel chip there. It's a whole different ARM instruction set. So there's pros and cons of each. But let's see how to install both of these. And this is going to be a longer video than typical because I am going to show you what is happening to your Mac at each step here so that you'll know how to troubleshoot. So there's a number of things going on, and it's just good to know what is actually happening and how to actually troubleshoot this. So if you just try to run Python on this, minus version, you'll see you have the ancient 2.7 version that Mac ships with everything, at least for now. If you do where or which Python, very useful command, it shows you that it's basically at this user bin Python. That is a redirected link. If you ls-l it, you'll see it's basically a link to this other, more difficult to type location that Mac has that installed on. So let's go ahead now and we'll install Miniforge first. Now, normally I like to use the brew package manager, which is great usually. And if you're not going to have two distinct distributions of Python on your computer, use brew. But here I'm going to install it directly because brew does a lot of magic to redirect low-level commands like conda and pip, and that just gets in the way if you have two entirely different distributions running side by side. I mean, each of these will have their own separate sets of virtual environments. They're completely separated from each other. So it's important to think about that, because where is Python, at least usually? Miniforge is going to put it right under your user's directory, Jeff, in my case, right here. Miniconda is usually going to be off on an opt directory underneath your user account, or just the root opt if you are installing it system-wide. Homebrew will tend to put it right at the opt at the machine level, underneath Homebrew, buried sort of deep in there. So you need to be aware of where these are installed at, because that way when you do a which Python, you can make absolute sure that you're where you think you are. And these are the installation URLs, and I have this all in the description. But Miniforge, I am going to go ahead and install it from this URL. So these are the Apple instructions for this. We're going to start with these steps, and then we're going to use an install script that I have that does this last part. So here we don't need to, well, let's get to the right part, actually. Yeah, Apple Silicon. So let's download the shell file that is going to basically install this for us. We'll copy this command here that is going to upgrade the security on that file. And then we'll go into downloads so that when I run this command, it's modifying the file that I just downloaded. We're going to do this command to actually start it. And then you have to say that you have to review you have to press enter to continue. Then you have to approve the agreement. Say yes, I agree. And then it's going to install it here. Remember this directory because that is where it has installed it. We're going to need to know that again. That's a standard location for it, so I'm just going to let it go. And it's extracting. They tend to change around where they install things sometimes. Sometimes they want it at the root. They like to install it under the user. So be aware of that because that'll future-proof you a bit as you're installing this. Now, this is important too. Do you wish the installer to run conda init? Conda init basically links it into your shell so that you see that, that base to tell you that you're in the base environment or whatever environment. Don't worry, we'll see it in a moment. I'm going to actually say no. This would normally be bad. So I said no. Now let's see, where has it modified my path? If I do Python, minus version, what are we looking like? We're still on 2.7. Does closing the shell fix that? I mean, always be aware of which Python your path is pointing at. Python minus version. We're still at 2.7. That's because we haven't ran that conda init. And the reason I told it not to run it is I want to show you what happens if you say no, or if you are seeing this normal prompt and there's no base there. And if you haven't seen that before, you're about to. So let's go ahead and initialize our shell so that every time we launch, we're going to be able to see that base prompt and be able to change our environment and have access to the correct version. Because if I still do Python minus version, you'll see we're still in 2.7. So to solve this, I move into my Miniforge 3 directory into bin, and now I should have access to conda. Of course, you have to prefix it with a dot. Actually, let's just do the full path so that it works from wherever. So there's the full path /conda. Now I have access to conda. I'm going to do conda init ZSH because we are running the Z shell, ZSH, like it says at the top of my window. That is what Mac is currently making as the default. If you have bash up here, then do bash, but you should probably be running the Z shell for Mac. I press enter, and it tells me that I have to start a new terminal for that to take effect, and I do. Now you see I have the base environment. I am in the base environment. We're good to go. Let's go ahead and install TensorFlow on this real quick. All this additional stuff that they talk about here on Mac, I have an install script that I like to use that will take care of all of that. Let me show you where it is. I'll also put a link in the description. But basically it's here, and it is in my class website for my class that I teach on deep learning. It's called TensorFlow Apple Metal. I'm going to show you this file because you may need to modify it. I try to keep this file as up to date as possible, but as they change things, you may notice you may need to change those version numbers. This is installing TensorFlow 2.5.0. If you remove all these double equals, it'll install the latest of everything, and hopefully that'll work. 9 times out of 10, that'll work. But sometimes these move at different paces than each other, so putting in these version numbers is a good safeguard against it failing. So I am going to grab this entire Get repository, which I already did. So this directory basically has my class downloaded, and I have the link in the description. Actually, we'll continue with this right here, install Jupyter and create environment. So from my base environment, I'm going to install Jupyter into my base environment. So let's pop this open and paste it there. We'll fast forward through this. All right, Jupyter is installed. Let's do the next step. I'm going to do conda deactivate. Being in the base environment when you do the rest of this can sometimes cause some issues. So I'm deactivating that. And now I'm going to run this command. This command will create a new environment for you called TensorFlow with all the Apple Metal stuff in there. Now it's important that we have this TensorFlow Apple Metal YAML file. It's in my class web directory on repository on GitHub that I have a link to. I'll assume that you've downloaded it. I have it in this directory called user projects T81 deep learning. Doesn't matter that your directory is named that. It just matters that you're in the same directory as it. And I'm going to paste this command into there. And this is going to run for a moment. This is going to install all of the Apple Metal stuff. All right, we have TensorFlow installed as the environment, and we can conda activate it. You can see now we are in the TensorFlow environment, and we can continue. Now, these were some issues that I think have been mostly resolved, but if you got grpc IO error and you got this error, I give you some additional commands to resolve it. This, unfortunately, is just the bane of your existence when you're using these state-of-the-art machine learning packages. There's lots of dependencies, and the owners of the dependencies do not all move at the same time or even communicate with each other all that well. So you'll run into issues here like this where just a change that gets pushed to one dependency breaks something else. Best way to figure that out is Google your error and continue. I'll probably pull this out at some point because I have not observed this in a while. So you conda activate it just like I told you. We're going to do conda install nb conda so that we can get this hooked into Jupyter. Yep. We'll fast forward. All right. That is done. This adds your environment to the Jupyter menu. So in that little drop down that you'll see in a moment, if you don't see your new TensorFlow environment that you created in there, that's what the problem is. We'll paste it. It should activate that. Yeah, that's extremely quick. Just to test it, I'm going to do conda deactivate just so that we get out of the TensorFlow environment, and then conda activate base. This is what it would look like if you just launched a whole new one altogether. So I'm just getting us back to our default sort of state. And then I'm going to do Jupyter Notebook. And it'll launch a Jupyter Notebook, which is a web browser. And then if we go into, let's just go into the first class session here. If I scroll to the very, very bottom, you can run this code. And you'll want to make sure that your environment is TensorFlow, which it is. You can always change the kernel, and you should see TensorFlow right there. These are some other ones that I'm working on that have nothing to do with what you would see. So make sure you're there, and let's go ahead and run this. So it's running this block of code. What we really want to see out of it is GPU is available. We'll fast forward through the brief initialization part. GPU is available. Awesome, awesome. That's great. We have Miniforge installed. If that's good enough for you, you're done. But if you also want Anaconda Miniconda, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I'll break out of my Jupyter that was running. And before I even start that, here's what we're going to do. And this is where we get off the beaten track. So why is it that we have that base show up there? What in the heck did conda init actually do to us, do to your Mac? If you look at a file called .zshrc, you'll see some code there. And look, it's using Miniforge. So this has something to do with what we just set up. I'm going to take my zsh file, and I'm going to move it. mv, my current directory, .zshrc, And I'm going to rename it to start miniforge.sh. And I've renamed it. Now watch what this does. I'm going to close that window and that one too. Start it up. Oh no, where's our base? Python, minus version. We are back to base Macintosh. I totally killed it. But actually I didn't. I've isolated it. If you do source start miniforge sh, just run that. Now it's here. Now everything's happy. We're in our Miniforge environment. So that's the first step for this. Now let's grab Miniconda real quick. So I'm going to the Miniconda download. You could just as easily do Anaconda. It would be all the same. Mac OS X. We want the bash. I don't need no fancy PKG installer. I like manual. So now you've got the Miniconda installer. Again, we don't have anything installed there particularly. If we go into downloads and then we do chmod +x Miniconda, that file we just downloaded, okay, that's good. And now we run it. Warning, your operating system appears not to be 64-bit, but you're trying to install a 64-bit version of this. That is fine, because Rosetta is going to save us. So we'll go ahead and say yes. Have to go through the usual licensing nonsense. All right, we are there and running. Notice where it's going to install it to. That's fine. You'll need to remember that later. Just press enter, and it will install everything there. Now, it's asking this question that I said no to before. We could say no again. In fact, I'll say no just so that if you do happen to not do that, you can deal with it. So all we need to do now is run conda init so that it's going to modify our shell file. So let's go back one, and we're going to change into Miniconda 3 bin. This should give us access to conda, and it does. We're going to do conda. That is the command to run. You run that, and everything should take effect. If we do this, now we have base again. And if we do which Python, we can see that we're running Miniforge. So now what we're going to do is change back to our user directory just with a cd. And if we do cat.zshrc, you can see that it has the Miniconda version in there. We're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to move the Miniconda, or the ZSH file, ZSHRC, to start Miniconda.sh. Now, if we look at both of those two files that we have created, start Miniconda, start Miniforge. Let's do these two side by side. Notice we don't have Python in either one. So if I do which Python, it's just that root one. But I can do source start. Actually, don't even need that. Source start Miniforge.sh. And now we've got our nice base environment. If I do conda in the list, you can see that we have base and we have TensorFlow. If I do, because we just installed TensorFlow over there. And now if I go over here and do source start Miniconda sh, now we have our base environment, conda env list. So when we're running these side by side, you can see that they both see each other. And you can use conda activate to use these interchangeably. The top one is Miniconda, the bottom two are Miniforge, because each has their own Python interpreter. They're like complete separate instances. So you can conda activate any one that you really want to, because over here we started in Anaconda. So let's go ahead and do conda activate. So look at these side by side. It's kind of interesting because they see each other. On the left side, you've got Miniforge. And notice up here, it has this first one that is unnamed. That means it's a foreign installation. You could activate it by the path, but we're not going to do that. If you activate it by name, you've got base and you've got TensorFlow. Over here in Miniconda, Anaconda world, it's the exact opposite. The base is the only named environment because I haven't created any new named environment. I could create my own TensorFlow over here, and I commonly do that so that I have it installed on both sides. So I can use an environment on either side of the fence if I need to. Base, since it shares the same name on each one, that's why this first base is unnamed. You can't have names from the other side. So this is both of them up and running. You now can start whichever one that you want. Something else that I do is, for example, I work primarily in Miniforge when I'm on a Mac. So you can also copy your start Miniforge to your ZSHRC file. Now you have a default. If you open up another terminal, by default, you're in Miniforge, as evident by that. So you can make whichever one you want your default. And this shows you a little bit of under the hood of what's really going on with these environments, how you can sort of wield your power and take it completely back out and have a default Mac, or however you want to do, if you just really want to run Python 2.7 for a bit. All right, thank you for watching this video. If you're interested in more things, Mac M1, let me know. If you want to see how to install some of the packages, like I know OpenCV is kind of difficult, some of those, let me know. Definitely like to make use of this computer, as well as my much more powerful GPU in the machine behind me. Thank you very much, and please subscribe to the video and give me a like if this was useful.